Maeve DuVally, welcome.
Max, thanks for having me. You know, I would say we don't have a antagonistic relationship. I would say that we've locked horns through the years.
Okay,
Is that a better characterization?
I think that's a better characterization, but I'm going to ask you in just a couple minutes about all kinds of risks that you have taken,
Okay.
personally and professionally.
Sure.
But I feel like we should start first things first.
Yep.
Why is risk, which is really, it's just a fancy way of saying basically the things that can go wrong. Why is risk so important to the work that happens on Wall Street?
Well, from a market perspective, obviously managing market risk, managing operational risk that somebody pushes a button they're not supposed to, and the trade that happens is bigger than it was supposed to be. Those are obvious risks. And there's also kind of macro risk, right? That a central bank does something that people weren't expecting. But the kind of risk that I manage, and incidentally, everybody at Goldman Sachs is taught they have to manage, is reputational risk.
Okay, so I want to talk about 2018. I think my favorite page of your book. You put on makeup at the office for the first time. What I really want to ask about is tell me about the day. What do you remember in full about that day in 2018?
Well, it was the day of the Knight Bagehot Fellowship dinner, which you've probably been to. Knight Bagehot Fellowship is a fellowship for mid-career financial journalists at Columbia University. I'm a alumni of that program and also on the board of Knight Bagehot Fellowship. It's really a nice gathering. I usually look forward to the dinner, but sometime early that afternoon, I literally had this overwhelming feeling and desire that I needed to wear makeup to the event that evening. And once I had that thought, I couldn't get it out of my mind. And I bolted out the door and walked a third of a mile to the closest Sephora and bought a bunch of makeup, which I put on at the end of the day. And I went to that dinner with some makeup on for the first time.
You put on the makeup, you end up kind of negotiating with yourself. And you say to yourself that you basically have this barrel of femininity, and you think should I just keep the lid on? Should I just keep the lid on? What would you have risked if you had done that?
I think that would have been impossible, but if I did that, I would have been miserable.
I was wondering when I read your book how it felt to kind of risk your male privilege. You were risking your male privilege in a male-dominated industry.
I'm certain I had male privilege, and I'm certain through the years I exercised male privilege, but I wasn't really consciously aware of it. And to be perfectly honest, it's not something that really matters to me.
When it's time for you to choose a name, you pick one that means she who intoxicates.
Yep.
Which blew me away when I read it because months before, you stopped drinking. Stopped drinking. Why did you quit?
Well, I had a series of progressively bad bottoms. My last bottom, which was in January of 2018, I holed myself up in an apartment. I only left to get alcohol. I drank around the clock, and I made an attempt on my life. So if I continued drinking, I'm convinced that I would have killed myself. After that episode, I made a decision that I wanted to live. And I knew if I wanted to live, I had to stop drinking.
Look, we have a professional relationship, so part of me feels like it's hard to say this, but it's also hard not to say it. I'm glad you made that decision. A lot of people who are miserable, they don't get out of their misery.
Yeah.
They stay there.
So the reality is there are a lot of drug addicts and alcoholics in the world, and the vast majority of them do not get sober and do not get clean, and they die alcoholic and addict deaths. That's the reality. So those of us who have made it to recovery don't take it for granted, number one, and two, realize that it was a gift. And it's a gift that has to be nourished all the time, because if you take it for granted, you're going to wind up right back on the street.
When you came out,
Yeah.
you got, I think, literal bouquets from traders at Goldman. I think you got these very warm notes from people. I think you got phone calls.
Yeah.
Those were from traders, and they were not from investment bankers. And you write in the book with clarity, investment bankers were quiet. I was so surprised by that. Can you explain that? Why did that happen?
I think probably some of my relationships with investment bankers were shallower than I thought. And I think investment bankers are very good at having really expansive relationships kind of across a wide group of people. But maybe some of those relationships aren't as deep as they would appear.
I love that you're accusing investment bankers writ large of a certain kind of interpersonal shallowness.
I'm not sure I said
yes,
it exactly
well, that is
that
exactly
way.
as you said it. No. I'm hoping that you'll.
You're not going to put words in my mouth, are you?
Well, I'm the interviewer now.
Yeah.
I asked you earlier about male privilege. Coming out as trans in the milieu of, first of all, New York City, where we are, but also a corporation, which I'm sure, as I'm also keenly aware, has a lot of pressures too. Can you talk, if you want to at all, about, I don't know, maybe the kind of privileges that come with having a really good career as you do?
Sure. So I certainly have white privilege. I have the privilege of having worked at Goldman Sachs. I'm relatively well off. I live in the Chelsea section of New York, which is arguably the best place to be an out transgender person in the world. And even before I left Goldman Sachs, I began to, and I've continued to be, an advocate or activist for the LGBTQ community more broadly, because not everybody is in a position to speak out. Not everybody wants to speak out, but I'm in a position to, and I want to speak out, so I'm going to.
Thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed this.
Thanks for having me, Max.
Watch The Businessweek Show, Thursday nights, 10:30 Eastern on Bloomberg Television, or 8:30 on Bloomberg.com or the Bloomberg app on connected TVs.